The sound of my front door's deadbolt slowly turning at 3:17 in the morning was so quiet I almost missed it over the hum of my bedroom air conditioner. But years of living alone had trained me to sleep lightly and notice every unfamiliar sound in my house. I lay perfectly still in my bed, heart hammering against my ribs, as I heard the soft creak of my hardwood floors under careful footsteps moving through my living room with the deliberate precision of someone who knew exactly where they were going and was trying not to wake me. But what terrified me most wasn't the fact that someone had broken into my home. It was the realization that they had used a key to get inside, which meant this wasn't a random break-in by a desperate stranger, but something far more personal and calculated. The footsteps paused at the bottom of my staircase, and in that moment of suffocating silence, I heard a voice whisper my name so softly it could have been the wind, except there was no wind, and whoever was in my house knew who I was and had come here specifically for me. My name is Sarah, and that night taught me that your home isn't your castle, it's your cage, and the people who want to get inside have been studying the lock for weeks, learning your routines, watching your windows, and waiting for the perfect moment when you're most vulnerable and alone. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with the absolute certainty that someone else is in your house? Ever found small things moved or changed when you know you left them differently? Drop a comment below if you've felt that primal terror when you realize your safe space has been violated, because tonight I'm sharing 3 true accounts that will make you question every lock on your door and every shadow in your hallway. These aren't sensationalized stories designed to make people paranoid about home security. These are real experiences from real people who learn that when someone decides to target your home, they can find ways to breach every defense you've put in place and turn the place where you should feel safest into a battlefield where your survival depends on split-second decisions and pure instinct. Michael thought his suburban Denver home was impenetrable. As a software engineer working from home, he'd invested significantly in security measures: comprehensive alarm system, motion-activated lighting security cameras, and reinforced doors and windows that were supposed to deter potential intruders and provide early warning of any unauthorized entry attempts. His house was located on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by similar homes occupied by families and working professionals who maintained their properties well and looked out for each other. The neighborhood had an active homeowners association and informal neighborhood watch program that encouraged residents to report suspicious activities and maintain awareness of unusual vehicles or people who didn't belong in the area. Michael felt secure in his home and neighborhood, and he had never experienced any security incidents or concerns that would suggest he was at risk for criminal targeting or home invasion. His sense of security was shattered when he began to notice subtle signs that someone had been entering his house while he was away, despite his sophisticated security system and the precautions he had taken to protect his property. The signs were small and could easily have been dismissed as forgetfulness or normal household changes. But Michael's attention to detail and familiarity with his home environment made him aware that things were being moved, rearranged, or disturbed in ways that couldn't be explained by his own activities. The first sign came when Michael noticed that items in his home office had been moved slightly from their usual positions. His computer mouse in a different location on his desk, and papers arranged in ways that he didn't remember organizing them. Michael initially dismissed these changes as forgetfulness, but as similar incidents continued to occur, he began to realize that someone was systematically searching through his personal belongings and work materials while he was away. Michael's investigation revealed that whoever was accessing his house had sophisticated knowledge of security systems and was able to bypass his alarm system without triggering any alerts or leaving obvious signs of forced entry. The intruder was entering and leaving his house without setting off motion detectors, door sensors, or any of the other security measures that were supposed to detect and prevent unauthorized access. Subscribe and hit that notification bell if you've ever discovered that your expensive security system was useless against someone who really wanted to get inside, because what Michael found out about his intruder's capabilities proved that some criminals have resources and knowledge that make most home security systems nothing more than expensive decorations. The realization that someone could bypass his expensive security system and enter his house at will filled Michael with a terror that went beyond simple concern about property theft or vandalism. The intruder's ability to access his home without detection suggested that they had extensive technical knowledge and possibly inside information about his security system, his installation and operation. Michael's attempts to identify the intruder and prevent future unauthorized entries were complicated by the fact that his security cameras were being systematically disabled or redirected during the times when the intrusions were taking place. The intruder was able to manipulate his surveillance system to avoid being recorded, suggesting that they had detailed knowledge of his security setup and the technical skills needed to interfere with electronic monitoring equipment. The situation escalated when Michael realized that the intruder was not simply searching through his belongings, but was systematically copying his personal and professional files, including financial records, work documents, and private communications that could be used for identity theft, corporate espionage, or personal blackmail. Michael discovered that his computer had been accessed and that files had been copied to external storage devices. Michael's fear intensified when he found evidence that the intruder had been spending extended periods of time in his house, including signs that they had used his kitchen bathroom and other facilities as if they were a temporary resident rather than a quick burglar. The intruder's comfort level and familiarity with his home suggested that they had been conducting surveillance of his daily routines and had detailed knowledge of his schedule. The most disturbing discovery came when Michael found hidden cameras and recording devices that had been installed throughout his house by the intruder, creating a comprehensive surveillance system that allowed them to monitor his activities, conversations, and personal life from remote locations. The surveillance equipment was professionally installed and nearly impossible to detect without specialized knowledge and equipment. Michael's realization that he had been living under constant surveillance in his own home, with every aspect of his private life being monitored and recorded by an unknown intruder, created a level of violation and terror that made it impossible for him to feel safe or secure in his own house. The knowledge that someone had been watching him sleep, work, and go about his daily routines while planning and executing repeated invasions of his home destroyed his sense of privacy and security. The situation reached a crisis point when Michael discovered that the intruder had been using the information gathered through surveillance and file copying to assume aspects of his identity and access his financial accounts, credit cards, and other personal resources. The intruder's activities had evolved from simple home invasion to comprehensive identity theft and financial fraud. Michael's efforts to stop the intrusions required him to work with law enforcement, private security consultants, and cybersecurity experts to identify the intruder and dismantle the surveillance network that had been installed in his home. The investigation revealed that Michael had been targeted by a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in long-term surveillance and identity theft operations, targeting high-income professionals who worked from home. Michael ultimately moved to a different state and changed careers to escape the ongoing effects of the invasion and surveillance that had destroyed his sense of security and privacy. The experience taught him that determined criminals with sufficient resources and technical expertise could defeat any home security system, and that the assumption of safety and privacy in one's own home was an illusion. But if you think sophisticated surveillance and identity theft represent the worst kind of home invasion, wait until you hear what happened to Jennifer and Mark in Atlanta. Because sometimes home invaders aren't interested in your possessions or your information. They're interested in your family, and they're willing to use your children as leverage to get exactly what they want. Jennifer and Mark were a married couple in their early 40s who lived with their 2 young children in a single-story ranch house in a quiet residential neighborhood in suburban Atlanta. The family had moved to the neighborhood specifically because of its reputation for safety and family-friendly atmosphere, and they had chosen their house because of its open floor plan, good sight lines, and location on a street with active neighbors. Jennifer worked as a nurse at a local hospital, and Mark was a high school teacher, and their combined schedules meant that someone was usually home with the children, except during specific hours when both parents were at work and the children were at school or daycare. The family had installed a basic security system when they moved into the house, including door and window sensors, motion detectors in common areas, and a monitoring service. The neighborhood's low crime rate and strong sense of community had made the family feel secure in their home, and they had never experienced any security incidents or concerns that would suggest they were at risk for criminal targeting or home invasion. Jennifer and Mark's sense of security was destroyed when they became the victims of a home invasion that occurred while they were sleeping in their bedroom with their children asleep in adjacent rooms, creating a situation where the family's safety and survival depended on their ability to protect themselves and their children from intruders who had entered their home with violent intentions. The invasion began around 2:30 in the morning, when Jennifer was awakened by sounds coming from the kitchen area of their house, sounds that were too deliberate and purposeful to be explained by normal household noises or the activities of family members. Jennifer initially assumed that one of their children had gotten up to get a drink of water or use the bathroom, but as she listened more carefully to the sounds from the kitchen, she realized that they were being made by multiple people who were moving through her house with familiarity and purpose. Jennifer quietly woke Mark and whispered her concerns about the sounds from the kitchen, and together they listened to the unmistakable evidence that strangers were in their house and moving toward the bedrooms where the family was sleeping. Mark's investigation of the sounds confirmed Jennifer's fears that their house had been invaded by multiple intruders who had gained entry without triggering the security system and were now moving through the house with apparent knowledge of its layout and the family's sleeping arrangements. Mark could hear at least 3 different voices speaking in whispers, and the intruders were discussing the locations of the family members and their plans for controlling and robbing the household. Turn on notifications if you're a parent, and the thought of armed strangers discussing your children's locations while they sleep makes your blood run cold. Because what Jennifer and Mark discovered about their intruders' plans proved that some home invasions are specifically designed to use children as weapons against their own parents. The realization that armed intruders were in their house and planning to confront their family created a level of terror and desperation that forced Jennifer and Mark to make split-second decisions about how to protect their children and themselves from people whose intentions were clearly violent and whose capabilities were unknown but obviously dangerous. Mark quietly retrieved a baseball bat from their bedroom closet, while Jennifer used her cell phone to call 911, whispering their address and situation to the emergency dispatcher, while trying to avoid making any sounds that would alert the intruders to their awareness of the invasion. The intruders' approach to the family's bedrooms was systematic and coordinated, with different individuals taking positions that would allow them to control access to exits and prevent the family from escaping or calling for help. The intruders had clearly planned the invasion in advance and had knowledge of the house's layout that suggested they had conducted surveillance of the property and the family's routines. Jennifer and Mark's attempts to protect their children were complicated by the fact that their 2 young children were sleeping in separate bedrooms, making it impossible to gather the entire family in one location where they could be defended more effectively. The parents had to make the agonizing decision about whether to try to reach their children's rooms or to barricade themselves in their own bedroom and hope that law enforcement would arrive before the intruders discovered and harmed the children. The situation escalated when the intruders began systematically searching the house for valuables and family members, making it clear that they intended to confront and control each member of the household rather than simply stealing property and leaving quickly. The intruders were armed with weapons and were prepared to use violence to achieve their goals. Mark's decision to confront the intruders was motivated by his realization that the criminals intended to harm his family regardless of their level of cooperation, and that passive resistance would not protect his wife and children from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to invade a family home and threaten children. Mark used his knowledge of the house's layout to ambush one of the intruders in the hallway, using the baseball bat to disable the criminal and create an opportunity for his family to escape or for law enforcement to arrive and take control of the situation. The confrontation between Mark and the intruders was violent and chaotic, with the family's survival depending on Mark's ability to prevent the criminals from reaching his wife and children, while Jennifer worked to evacuate the children through a bedroom window that provided access to the backyard and potential escape routes to neighbors' houses. Jennifer's escape with the children was successful, but Mark's confrontation with the intruders resulted in serious injuries that required immediate medical attention and hospitalization. The intruders fled the scene when they realized that law enforcement had been called and that their invasion had been detected and resisted, but not before causing significant physical and psychological trauma to the family. The investigation revealed that the family had been targeted by a criminal organization that specialized in home invasions targeting middle-class families with children, using the presence of children as leverage to ensure compliance and reduce the likelihood that victims would resist or fight back against the intruders. Jennifer and Mark ultimately moved to a different state and invested in comprehensive security measures, including safe rooms, advanced alarm systems, and private security monitoring that would provide immediate response to any future security threats. The experience taught them that no neighborhood was immune to violent crime and that determined criminals could defeat basic security measures. But even organized criminals targeting families with children seem almost manageable compared to what David experienced in Montana. Because sometimes home invasions aren't about money or possessions, they're about revenge, and the people coming for you have military-grade equipment, professional training, and a very personal reason to make sure you don't survive the night. David was a retired police officer in his early 60s who lived alone in a rural farmhouse outside of a small town in Montana, believing that his law enforcement background and remote location would protect him from the kind of criminal activity that he had dealt with during his career in urban policing. David had chosen the rural location specifically to escape the crime and violence that he had encountered during 30 years of police work. David had renovated the old farmhouse to include security features and defensive measures that reflected his professional knowledge of criminal tactics and home protection strategies. David's farmhouse was located on 20 acres of land that provided natural security through distance and isolation from potential criminal activity, and the property included outbuildings and defensive positions that David had prepared as part of a comprehensive security plan. David felt confident in his ability to detect and respond to any security threats, and he had never experienced any criminal activity or suspicious incidents during his 5 years of retirement in the rural Montana location. David's confidence in his security and defensive capabilities was tested when he became the target of a home invasion that was specifically planned and executed by criminals who had identified him as a former police officer and had developed tactics designed to overcome his professional training and defensive preparations. The invasion began when David noticed unauthorized vehicles approaching his property during evening hours. Vehicles that were using tactics and routes that suggested the occupants had conducted surveillance of his property and had planned their approach to avoid detection by his security measures and defensive positions. David's law enforcement training immediately recognized the approaching vehicles as a coordinated threat that required immediate defensive action, and he began implementing the security protocols and defensive measures that he had prepared for exactly this type of situation. David activated his alarm systems, secured his defensive positions, and prepared his weapons and communications equipment for what he realized would be a prolonged confrontation. Share this with any law enforcement officers you know, because what David discovered about his attackers' capabilities proved that some criminals have resources and training that rival military special operations units, and they specifically target former cops who think their retirement will protect them from the enemies they made during their careers. The criminals' approach to David's property was systematic and professional, using military-style tactics and equipment that suggested they had significant training and experience with assault operations. and were prepared to overcome the kind of resistance that a former police officer would be capable of mounting. The criminals had detailed knowledge of David's property layout and defensive preparations. David's realization that he was facing a coordinated assault by multiple armed criminals with professional training and detailed knowledge of his defenses created a level of danger that exceeded anything he had encountered during his police career, including high-risk arrests and tactical operations that had involved armed and dangerous suspects. The assault on David's farmhouse continued for several hours, with the criminals systematically testing and probing his defenses while maintaining positions that prevented him from escaping or calling for help from law enforcement agencies that were located over an hour away from his remote property. The criminals' tactics included attempts to cut his power and communications, use of smoke and distraction devices, and coordinated movements designed to overwhelm his defensive positions. David's survival of the prolonged assault required him to use all of his law enforcement and military training, as well as his detailed knowledge of his property and defensive preparations to maintain his position and prevent the criminals from gaining access to his house or capturing him alive. The confrontation involved extended periods of gunfire and tactical maneuvering that tested David's physical and mental endurance. The criminals' eventual withdrawal from David's property came only after they realized that their assault had been detected by neighbors who had heard the gunfire and had called law enforcement agencies that were responding with tactical teams and helicopter support that would make it impossible for the criminals to complete their mission and escape without being identified. The investigation revealed that David had been targeted by a criminal organization that specialized in attacking former law enforcement officers who had been involved in investigations or prosecutions that had resulted in the imprisonment of criminal organization members. The assault was intended as both revenge for David's past law enforcement activities and as a warning to other former officers. The criminal organization's capabilities and resources were far beyond those of typical criminal groups, including access to military-grade weapons and equipment, professional tactical training, and intelligence-gathering capabilities that allowed them to identify and target former law enforcement officers who had moved to remote locations believing they would be safe from retaliation. David's survival of the assault required him to relocate to an undisclosed location and assume a new identity to protect himself from future attacks by the criminal organization and its associates. The experience taught him that no amount of training, preparation, or defensive measures could guarantee protection against determined criminals with sufficient resources and professional capabilities. These three accounts from home invasion victims across America reveal a terrifying truth about the places we call home. No security system, no neighborhood watch, and no amount of preparation can protect you from people who are determined to invade your private space and destroy your sense of safety and security. Michael's experience with sophisticated surveillance and identity theft in Denver proved that some criminals can turn your own home into a surveillance center where every aspect of your private life becomes a weapon they can use against you. Jennifer and Mark's family nightmare in Atlanta demonstrated that some home invaders specifically target families with children, using the presence of vulnerable family members as leverage to ensure compliance and maximize the psychological trauma inflicted on their victims. David's military-style assault in Montana revealed that some criminals have resources, training, and motivation that rival professional military units, and they specifically target people whose past actions have made them enemies. The most chilling aspect of these accounts isn't the individual incidents themselves. It's the realization that in each case, the victims had taken reasonable security precautions and had chosen their homes and neighborhoods based on safety considerations, yet they still became targets for criminals who had the resources, knowledge, and determination to overcome any defensive measures. Michael had no warning that his sophisticated security system would be useless against criminals who had the technical knowledge to disable his cameras, bypass his alarms, and install their own surveillance equipment to monitor his every move. Jennifer and Mark had no indication that their family-friendly neighborhood would attract criminals who specialized in targeting families with children and using those children as weapons against their own parents. David had no clue that his law enforcement background and remote location would make him a target for a criminal organization with military-grade equipment and professional training that could mount a sustained assault on his heavily defended property. If you're currently relying on standard security measures to protect your home and family, if you've ever felt that someone was watching your house or studying your routines, or if you found evidence that someone had been in your home while you were away, trust your instincts and consider whether your current security measures are adequate to protect you from people who view your home not as your sanctuary, but as their target. Comment below if these stories have changed how you think about home security. And remember that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from people who have been watching and planning for weeks or months before they make their move. The next time you lock your doors and set your alarm system before going to bed, remember these stories and ask yourself whether you're really secure, or whether you're just going through the motions of security while remaining vulnerable to people who have already figured out how to defeat your defenses. Before you go, check out the playlist in the description for more true home security stories that will change how you see your own living space forever. Because in the end, the most terrifying realization isn't that these things happened. It's that they're still happening right now to people who thought they were safe, who believed their security measures were adequate, and who never imagined that their home could become a hunting ground for predators who had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sleep well tonight, and remember, the next time you hear an unexplained sound in your house, ask yourself if you're really alone, or if someone who has been studying your routines and planning their approach has finally decided that tonight is the perfect time to turn your home into their crime scene. Because sometimes the most dangerous place you can be is the place where you feel safest. And the people who want to hurt you most are the ones who have been watching you long enough to know exactly when you're most vulnerable.